Hey, everybody. Welcome to Drag Illustrated's The Racing Business with me, Jason Dukes. So welcome to this brand new show called Drag Illustrated's The Racing Business with me. So what to expect from this show? It's going to be a show where we're going to have the leaders and industry leaders in all of motorsports, and not just drag racing, but all different types of motorsports. One of the reasons why is because sometimes the answers of whatever problems are happening in your segment of racing has sometimes already been answered in other different segments of racing. So we're going to have lots of really good interviews here. Sometimes we may have some live shows if there's some breaking news or something that needs to be talked about right away. But most of the time, it's going to be interviews with people that you're really going to learn a lot from. We're going to really go in depth with the people so that you can learn a lot about them, about their business, and also their take on the business. So this is really a business show to help you and your business. So who am I? Jason Dukes. Why am I doing this show, and how did this come about? Well, I've been in motorsports for all of my life. I'm one of the people, well, not all of my life, but all of my working life since my mid-teens. I'm one of those people. I end up speaking a lot to students about racing and a bunch of different things about racing. And I'm always the person. It's like I've never driven a race. Well, I've never raced a race car. I've driven a bunch of race cars, but I've never raced a race car. The business of racing has been my business for all of my career. That is my career. The business of racing is my career. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this podcast. Who am I? Originally from New Jersey, the big racing capital of the world, New Jersey. So actually, fought really hard to get into the industry. Worked for NASCAR for a couple of years in the early 2000s, and then left NASCAR to run the drag strip at Gateway International Raceway. And that's where I met Wes Buck. Left there when my dad got sick, and then had to do a bunch of different things in order to find my way because I had to move back to New Jersey. So I had to find my way in the motorsports industry, and ended up doing consulting for sports car racing, drag racing, all the other things. Kept my connections, stayed in the business, and now I actually run Captain's Chair Coaching, where I am a life and a business coach, an executive coach to a lot of people in the racing business, some of which will be on the show, and we'll get to pick their brains and get to see the racing side of their life and their life side of their life. All right, good enough. So for today's show, excited for the first guest to be Wes Buck of Drag Illustrated, of the World Series of Pro Mod, of some soon to be named other things. And the person who is the person who has Drag Illustrated and this podcasting platform that we're going to be on. So if I can bring Wes in as the first guest of the Drag Illustrated Racing Business with me, Jason Dukes. Wes,
what's going on, buddy? Thank you so much for having me, man. I appreciate it a ton, dude. What's going on? Hey, great job. We're doing good. We're cooking with oil.
Thank you. No, this is good. This is something that's been in the works now, probably for 2 years, like mulling around in my brain, and finally put all the pieces together, and all the things came together. So I don't know. I guess before we start, tell us about how excited you are about the show.
Man, to be honest, this is a real big part of the vision here at Drag Illustrated. The racing business, we have another show that we just launched called Drag Illustrated Shop Talk. We have a handful of other programs coming together in the coming weeks and months. And to be honest, that's just, for us, we feel we're the best storytellers in drag racing, and we want to tell as many as we can, but it can't just be me. It can't just be Mike. It can't just be JT. We've got to grow the faces on the screen, the number of faces on the screen. And that's kind of where you have come in, at least on this particular project. Like you said, we've been talking about this forever, but I'm glad to see it finally come to fruition, mainly because the value that it's going to provide. That is, we have a lot of things, a lot of hats we wear here at Drag Illustrated, but I think the mission or the goal that's closest to our heart is just to find ways to serve this community, even to develop new ways to serve this community, this incredible group of people, and help them prosper, help them be more successful on the racetrack, entertain them when the time comes, but also educate and inform. And that's kind of where you come in, Jason, where, as you mentioned in your intro, being in and around motorsports your entire life and working with all these difference makers that you've worked with, I feel you're going to be the perfect voice, the perfect tour guide, if you will, to kind of introduce all these different people to our audience and hopefully let them learn something from it, right? I mean, I'm looking forward to knowing the list of guests that you have in store. I'm looking forward to watching this. I mean, because some of the stuff that I watch the most are things like this in other industries, like general business podcasts. And the fact that this is a motorsports centric business podcast, I mean, that's right up my alley, man. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, you are one of the best storytellers, if not the best storyteller in racing, and especially drag racing. But a lot of people don't actually know the story of Wes Buck. So we're probably going to end up, not probably, but we're going to turn the camera onto Wes to get to know Wes the person, Wes the history. Before we turn this into a hardcore business conversation and talk about some of the trends and what you see happening. So tell us about, I guess, give us a quick not even a quick summary. Let's not quick summarize it. Let's start as a kid. Tell us about Wes Buck the kid.
Oh my goodness. Well, fortunately, I've got this halfway put together right now because I actually had to kind of tell this story to some friends my wife and I have made in our little neighborhood here in Texas. So I've recently done this. But if you want to go all the way back to kid, when I was born, I mean, I jokingly say this, but it's true. I was in my mother's womb at the drag strip a week before I was born. Drag racing is basically all I've ever done. It's all I've cared to do, to be honest with you. And a lot of kids grew up playing stick and ball sports, going to basketball practice, going to football practice, blah, 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 Friday night lights. All of that was drag racing for me. I didn't participate really in any of those things. I went racing with my dad, racing with my uncles and various other folks. And over the course of time, no matter what I tried to do, I'm doing a whole lot of fast forwarding here. But throughout my high school and very, very, very brief college experience, which lasted about 2 weeks, all I ever wanted to do was get into racing. But I also wasn't, I mean, this is me kind of airing out my dirty laundry or whatever. And much to my father's disdain, I was no sort of super mechanic, no sort of ace fabricator. So I was trying to find my way as to how I could do what came naturally to me, which even now I look back and recognize maybe it was always just communicate. That's what I was perhaps best at. But anyways, I spent
actually also just not even to stop you, but to air the dirty laundry. This is a place to air the dirty laundry because there's going to be a whole bunch of people watching that are going to be like, wait, me too.
Yeah, I hope so, because and I think if there is a takeaway, I don't want to go into traumatic childhood experiences. But,
no, definitely, yeah, right.
But it's my dad and growing up, I had an opportunity, and it was always a hands-on deal. Going racing with my dad, it was never something that I wasn't integrally involved with. But it wasn't something I found that as I got older and started to tackle more projects myself, it wasn't something that came super naturally to me, right? It wasn't. Working mechanics, no matter what I may understand about theory or how it works or why it does what it does, it was nothing that I got excited about, personally, to go rebuild a turbo 400 transmission. That wasn't anything that I was excited to do or be a part of. I was more kind of the mindset of let's fix what's broken. Only then are we going to get our hands dirty and do all that stuff. Otherwise, I want to just go race and do the fun part of the business. But anyways, growing up in an auto repair shop, I mean, and this is a pretty significant part of the story. My dad owns an auto repair shop still to this day, been in business over 40 years in rural Missouri. And that was where I received most of my education, at Buck Brothers Sunny Slope Automotive on 710 West Potter in Kirksville, Missouri, and answering the phone, pumping full service gas, washing windows, checking air and tires, doing all those things, changing oil, running errands, mounting tires, fixing flats. That was my education, and working behind the counter. I mean, I found myself early on. I remember being 12, 13, 14 years old, and I was doing all the invoicing via QuickBooks at my dad's repair shop because he was not computer literate whatsoever. Mm-hmm. I was. So, I mean, I was doing the books for my dad's business when I was a teenager, and it wasn't very long before I was scheduling jobs, dealing with customers, buying product, dealing with vendors, etc. And I just kind of continually gained an education on business and life and just working with the public that really became, I think, probably my strong suit. That started so young. I mean, I feel like I've probably got, I mean, we've been in business here at Drag Illustrated for 18 years, but prior to that, I've got 10, 15 years of working with the public at my dad's repair shop. And that's a interesting environment to work in. Like, not quite as bad as an insurance salesman, but you see a lot of people when they're kind of in a tough moment, right? I mean, the car's broken down. And sometimes that's the only mode of transportation they have. So you kind of learn to deal with people that are in a heightened state. Overall, they're like a little bit in distress. Sometimes they're excited. They're getting a new set of wheels and tires for their pickup truck or whatever. But it just taught me a lot about humans and the way people interact. And I got to meet people from various financial backgrounds, right? You'd meet the guy that was scraping together to mount a single used tire for $20 because he needed his car to last a couple more days, right? But then I dealt with lawyers and local bankers and all these like kind of small town bigwigs that were fairly well-to-do and expected a different type of service or a different experience. So I think all those things, this cornucopia of people that I was exposed to early in life and working with them regularly, kind of put me in a good position when I got out of high school and college. Although I didn't know what I exactly wanted to do, I knew that I needed to leverage my ability to work with the public and leverage my ability to make friends, make connections, make meaningful connections, and build upon them. So I don't know if that's enough of the kids stuff, but yeah, that was a lot of my youth. That's pretty much most of the pre-working in drag racing stuff. And that's a separate tale that I can start on whenever you want. But.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the next prompt is tell us about your first job in drag racing. And for many people, the first job in drag racing may be a prolonged story, but for you, the first job in drag racing is pretty close to, this is and then I started Drag Illustrated.
Yeah, man. I mean, it was, and it's funny, as I've gotten older and you find yourself like reminiscing a little bit more than you do when you're younger, because it was always just like the next thing. But I feel like I spend, largely because of you, maybe actually in our relationship, but I do spend a little more time looking back and how things have changed and, how far we've come and all these various experiences that I've been blessed to have. But I remember actually my first jobs in drag racing were entrepreneurial driven. I remember one of the first real significant projects I ever tackled was building a website, a marketing deck, and a promotional video for a touring match racing series that my dad and a few of his friends had started. This was in like the late 90s and early 2000s. And you start thinking about, I mean, I'm a sophomore in high school, a freshman in high school, and I'm literally, I mean, I still have a copy of it. It would be fun to watch sometime, but I have a copy of the DVD that I produced when I was 16 years old in high school before. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you the hoops I had to jump through back then, pre all this technology that exists now. I had cables run into a VCR, into a camcorder, into a TV, into a computer. I mean, it was a whole different deal back then. But I think about what I do now. I've been doing it for like basically. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, but my first job was to help promote and organize the efforts of the Mid-America Pro Stock Association, this group that I talk about my father and his friends putting together. Basically, at the time, my dad had an outdated NHRA Pro Stock car. So it was built to race in a place that we were not financially or in any way, shape, or form prepared to go do. But nonetheless, that was what my dad cared about. That was the only type of racing that he wanted to do. So our belief was, we're not even going to attempt to go NHRA Pro Stock racing and make fools of ourselves. We're going to create something of our own. There had been a handful of iterations of this prior to this moment, but we decided we were going to put together something of an exhibition. 8 cars. We had kind of a little network that we put together of cars that were fell under the umbrella of Pro Stock, were close performance-wise, so we could go to a track. Our target audience was like the smaller, I call them Saturday night drag strips, like the local yokel 8th Mile drag strip. We were a great booked in show option. You could pay us $3,500 is I think what we charged. We'd come in, we'd make a couple of runs on Friday night or Saturday during the day, and then we would run like an elimination show with big burnouts. And I mean, we were embodying the showmanship that I complain about not existing today quite frequently, but we were, I look back at some of the things my dad did and the things that we did as racers and as a promotional entity way back then. And I'm like, golly, we were super ahead of our time. But anyway, so that was like my first endeavor. That was all going on while I was in high school and kind of looking at, and I mean, I'd be embarrassed to tell you, like, I thought I wanted to be a deputy sheriff at one point. I was doing ride-alongs, signing up for law enforcement school. I went to school for a week to become a computer programmer. That was no bueno. So I decided I was going to switch my major to computer systems networking. That was also no bueno whenever I found out we're going to be climbing through attics pretty early on in the program. So long story long, at this point, and I can share it with you because it has some value, but I was given an opportunity by Carl Moyer, who hardcore drag racers have heard that name. Carl Chevrolet, the big K, ARL Chevrolet out of Ankeny, Iowa, kind of an iconic brand. If you're in the drag racing scene, you've likely seen the logo a lot. He owned an 8th mile drag strip in Southeast Iowa called Eddyville Raceway Park. And it was about 80 miles north of where I was born and raised, Kirksville, Missouri. It was our local haunt. That was the track that I was at the week before I was born. That was the track that my family spent most our Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays at throughout my youth. Matter of fact, they were there. My dad and uncles were there racing recently, right? So it's a huge part of our life. In the fall of 2004, there was a rumor circulating in the local racing community that there was going to be a management change at this facility, that it may change hands, but Carl Moyer, the owner of the facility, who was a superstar IHRA Pro Modified racer in his day, anyways, he was looking to make a change there. One thing led to another. I won't bore you any further with the gory details, but one thing led to another. And Carl, a lot of these racetracks, especially those that are owned by well-to-do folks, oftentimes serve as something of a black hole financially. Right. And I threw my hat into the ring. And this is, if there's something to take away from this particular story, it's that I called Carl. It wasn't the other way around. I reached out to them and I don't even know how I got a hold of the guy. I remember calling Carl Chevrolet in Ankeny, talking to Shelly Massey, his assistant, and convincing Shelly that Carl was expecting to hear from me. Never talked to this guy in my life, which led to her connecting me to Carl. And I mean, it was like a fairly simple process once I had BS'd my way through the fact that Carl was definitely expecting this call. He's been looking for me to call for a while. Anyways, I pitched them a bunch of ideas on things that I wanted to do at the track in a promotional capacity. I was like, nothing to do with running the facility. I just know they were open to some changes and potentially open to some suggestions. Heads up style outlaw drag racing was really taking hold in the Southeast United States at this time. So my thought was, why not borrow some of the things, just like fashion and technology? So many things trickle in from the coasts, right, to the Midwest. Right. We were well behind our times in the Midwest as far as the drag racing scene is concerned. If a fast car ran 4 flat on the East Coast or in the Deep South, they ran 450s in the Midwest, the fastest cars. So anyways, I threw my name into the hat, pitched a bunch of ideas. Hey, let's do this outlaw pro mod deal and this outlaw 10-5 thing. And I want to do a drag radial shootout. And I want to do a point series. And I want to do a streetcar night. I want to do midnight madness and race from 10 to 2 a.m. with instant greens and no scoreboards. Yeah, I want to do all these ideas. And so Carl, much like this conversation thus far, could hardly get a word in edgewise. And I finally took a breath or whatever. And he said, hey, man, I appreciate the call. I don't really know what I'm going to do. I don't know what the future of Eddyville Raceway Park is, but I'll keep all this in mind as we move forward. So I, hung up, never really thought about it again. And one thing led to another. And I was actually walking out of class. I believe I was actually walking to a class and my cell phone rang. And back then it was a sweet ass Sprint flip phone, right?
Oh, sweet.
I see it, 515, which for those that know area codes, that's Des Moines, Iowa. And I'm like, who's calling me from 515? But back then you answered the phone. Like you don't, like now I would just be like, yeah, red button. No, I hate
it cost too much back then for people to just
call randomly.
It was really
so
involved.
I thought, you know what, whatever, flip the phone open. Hello. And I mean, I'll never forget it ever in my life. Wes? I said, yeah, Carl Moyer. And he has this deep made for radio voice. And I'm like, oh, holy moly. Hi, Carl. What's going on, man? He's like, man, I just haven't been able to stop thinking about our conversation and how fired up and passionate you are about this racetrack. And I think that's just what it needs. And
Yeah.
I tend to lose a lot of money with this particular project. It was never really designed to make tons of money. I'd love to see it not lose so much money. But as I've thought about it over the course of the last, I believe a few weeks had gone by, he said, if I'm going to lose my ass, I might as well lose my ass with you. And I thought, really? And he's like, yeah, man. He goes, so here's what I'll do. And this was a wild thing for me. And this is a kid living at home with my parents at the time, struggling, rough time for me, just kind of floundering, a ship lost at sea. Like I had some passion and some visions that, or whatever things I wanted to pursue, but no real understanding of how to make any of that happen. So Carl says to me, here's what I'll do. You got fire in your belly, kid. That's what he told me. You got fire in your belly, kid. So here's what I'll do. I'll give you a salary. He goes, and it's not going to be a lot. Barely survive. He goes, I said, okay. He goes, but I'll give you a house to live in, and you can come up here and pick up a truck off the lot, a brand new truck to drive. And he goes, I'll pay all the utilities at the house. I'll pay everything. Because the house, it's incredible. Like a 2,500 plus square foot home on the property of the racetrack in Southeast Iowa. So I was going to relocate. This was a big deal for me, moving from Missouri to Iowa. It's a questionable decision for anybody. But anyways, I pull the trigger, say, yeah, man, let's do it. And well, here's a key detail that I'm leaving out. Not going to pay me a lot of money. Told me he wants me to get by, but he's not going to pay me for nothing. I said, okay, that's fine. He's giving me a chance, and I had to play ball. And I said, that's fine. He goes, but I tell you what, I've never made a penny on this racetrack. Owned it since 1993, I believe. He goes, I've never made a penny. He goes, if you can make it make $1, I'll split it with you, whatever it makes. He goes, but if we lose money, it's my baby. So that's the deal. If you can make this thing make money, which it never has, we'll split it. And I thought, definitely didn't go to class, never went to Indian Hills Community College or even thought about it ever again. Walked out, moved on, and went straight to Des Moines, Iowa, essentially to shake hands and ultimately make a deal and kind of prepare to take over operations at ERP. That was my first job in drag racing, man. And there's a ton of stories that I can tell you about it. And probably one of the most valuable experiences of my life. It was tough. I mean, I know 80 miles, I think about our military men and women and all these folks like yourself that in myself at this point in time. I mean, that was such a huge deal for me to move 80 miles away, 87 miles, I think it was, from door to door, to move 87 miles away from my family, whom I now live 750 miles away from and quite, have gotten used to it. But back then, key note here, I was 21 years old. Right. So at the time, I was the youngest IHRA member track operator in the world. I was the youngest guy doing the job. So yeah, I was 21 when I took that position initially. And yeah, man, here we are. A lot's happened since then. That was in 2000. I left the track in the winter of 05 or start of 06, I guess. So yeah, lots happened since then.
Yeah. So you said a lot of things happened there. How about what was the biggest thing that you learned and or biggest lesson? And then how did Drag Illustrated come about?
The track management thing was a real fantastic experience. And I wish more racers and more people that operate in our space would have had that experience. I had a lot of big ideas and I wasn't always keen on listening. I've learned to become a listener, and I've learned to, especially when I'm in the room with people that are more accomplished or I always like to say people that are where I want to be, I'm silent a lot of times. I'm not talking. I'm spoken when spoken to because I'm trying to listen and see what I can learn or what I can pull from this and add to my shtick or add to, my repertoire of knowledge. So anyways, I think if I had to point, there's a couple, just the experience of working with, it's very similar, I found, to standing behind the counter, behind the cash register at Buck Brothers Sunny Slope Auto Repair. You're dealing with a lot of people that are having different days, that come from different places, that are experiencing different things, that are at different seasons in their life. And knowing that it's not one size fit all, the process or the way I could handle a situation with this person would not work with this person. And that doesn't make that person wrong or this person wrong, or it's just knowing that life is not one size fits all. Like Flex Fit pulls it off with hats, but I don't really feel like there's any other place where that's the case. It's just so learning and accepting really quickly that like, wow, the way I handled this is not going to work over here and vice versa. So being open to that. One of my favorite stories that I like to tell is something that admittedly, as you, I think, will attest, for decades after, I still struggled with. But the first time I was introduced to a real strong leadership notion was during my time at Eddyville Raceway Park, working for Carl Moyer. I remember 4th of July weekend, which was just this past weekend for the racing masses. So many, many moons ago, 4th of July weekend, 2005 it was. We have our big night of fire, which is such a common phrase at this point in time. It's hilarious. But night of fire, we had nitro funny cars, jet cars, wheel standers, a local touring group, the Ozark Mountain Super Shifters. We had the Nostalgia Super Stockers. I booked in all this stuff. I remember one of the things was that it also helped me with was desensitized me to big numbers. Way back then, I think I paid, that was in 2005. If I remember correctly, I wrote a check to Frank Pedregon for $14,000 to come in and make 3 passes, right? In his Nitro Funny car. And I wrote a check to Jack Wyatt for the same amount or very close, 12 or 14,000. He was more local, so he was willing to work with me a little bit because his costs were less. But it was those are the biggest checks I'd ever written at the time. I'm 21 years old, actually just turned 22 earlier in the year. And it was such a huge deal. But just knowing those transactions were happening in our sport was a really positive experience. But that very weekend, we had a guy call in sick, which was just the game, the business. That's the business, right? People are going to disappoint you. People are going to fall out of play when you need them most sometimes. So it was an interesting situation for me because we had developed something of a badass team, right? I had a great race director, great concession stand manager, great tower operator, great announcer, great starting line guy, great. I mean, silly things like ticket taker, the person in the ET shack. I mean, we had a great team, great front gate staff. I mean, great people, fantastic staff, all the way, great EMT. We had a great team, and I had a great young man working in the water box. And when he no-showed me, it was a tough experience because I'm going, man, we had such a badass, we had such a great thing going. And then he no-shows me on our biggest weekend. I couldn't believe it. Then, to make matters worse, I get the phone call from that same 515 area code that I have now saved. And it's Carl Moyer calling me from his cell phone, telling me that he's headed down, that he's going to come down from Des Moines. He didn't come to the track often, like maybe 2 times that I can really remember while I was there. So it was a huge deal. He was going to drive his new Corvette down to the racetrack, come see me and hang out for a little while. And I thought, man, I got to babysit Carl. I want to make sure that I spend time with him. But I thought, you know what? I'm going to run the water box too, because this is my moment. This is my opportunity to show Carl, my boss, that I'm willing to do anything, right? I'll do whatever it takes to be successful. And I see his red Corvette roll through the gate convertible. And this guy looks like, I like to tell people all the time, well, I'm going to screw myself up, so I'll stop. But just looked and smelled like money. Do you know what I mean? Like just perfect hair, the right sunglasses, golden tan like I try to be. I mean, just perfect, right? Carl Moyer always carried himself that way. And it was an incredible thing to see, and especially an incredible thing to see up close. Carl rolls up the gate, rolls through the gate, beautiful facility there in Eddyville, Iowa, rolls up the stage lanes and just literally parks like right beside the tower, like he owns the place, right? Because he does. Yeah. So anyways, when he rolls up, I'm beaming with pride because I am drenched. It's July in Iowa. Mm-hmm. It's 150 degrees out, right? So I have sweat through my socks, sweat through my khaki shorts, right? Sweat just beat red, more red than I am now. But I'm in the water box, man, hosing her down, baby. And I had a little, you do it like a certain way. You kind of do this. Turn to the other side. I'm just like DJing again, right? Right. So anyways, I'm beaming,
and especially in July in Iowa, you also have to do it, and by the time you get the other lane, this lane is dried up. You go,
it's a true story. So, anyways, beaming with pride, Carl has made his way up to the tower, right, where our kind of control area, the timing area was, and I thought, I'm going to go up and holler at Carl. So I go up the stairs, and like I said, I'm proud of myself. I got a shop towel and shop rag in my back pocket, like my dad always wanted me to have. And I'm wiping sweat off my brow, and I come in and, hey, Carl, man, I'm so glad you came or whatever. And so we exchanged pleasantries. We hadn't seen each other like face to face in a little while, although we did have regular meetings. Talk about the race, who's doing what, who's running good, blah, blah, blah. And he says, hey, man, I want to talk to you about something real quick. And I'm like, oh, shit, this ain't good, you know? And he kind of drags me away from Dennis, this young man that was in the tower. And he kind of drags me away from Dennis. He says, hey, man, I saw you down there where you're surely not working the water box, are you? And I said, well, man, our guy, you know, he no-showed, but man, the show's got to go on. You know, we got to, you know, we had to, you know, so I was just kind of filling in, you know, until I figure out. And he's like, oh, cool. Yeah. Okay. He goes, well, let me tell you something. And I said, okay. Then I'm thinking I'm about to get some real attaboy, you know, like, good job, man. Going the extra mile. What an example you're setting. He looks at me and stoic. Wes, you're the captain of the ship. And I said, uh-huh. Yeah. And he goes, the captain of the ship doesn't swab the decks. The captain of the ship makes sure the decks get swabbed.
Right.
And I thought, and I go, okay. He goes, find someone to run the water box. Hire someone. There's a kid here. There's someone here racing with their dad that wants to make $100. Whatever. Find someone else to run the water box. You've got more important things to do. And it was, I mean, admittedly, and I think most people that own their own business or, you know, are trying to accomplish anything struggle with this a little bit, where we get in our own way. We want to have our hands on everything. We want to do everything ourselves. And I'm not here to say that that fateful moment in the summer of 2005 set me on a new course. I mean, that's something that I struggle with still to this day, but it's typically that story, either telling it to someone else or thinking about it, that kind of reminds me that I can't do it all. And a lot of times I'm the bottleneck. Like, I've got to get out of my own way. I've got to let these things happen without me. I've got to be okay with it not being maybe 100% what I wanted it to be. But if we can get close and I don't have to be involved, that's very, very, very important. So it was a real lesson about leadership and delegation. And Carl, I think, would tell you too, there's a time and place, right? When you're in the foxhole and things have gone south, it's all hands on deck, right? There are plenty of moments in life and in business where it's all hands on deck. But you also have to be ready for when it's not. And what I found myself kind of is needing it to be that. Like, I struggle with that still today, where I kind of need everything to be upside down and on fire. Otherwise I'm uncomfortable, right? Like, why is everything so calm and normal? Like, that's, I haven't spent a lot of my...
step in somewhere. I want to step in somewhere. Yeah. No, well, that's a great story and a great lesson. Tell us about the start of Drag Illustrated.
Yeah, so there's some, we don't got to get in the weeds too much more, but the basically what happened is and this true story, so it's worth telling. We had a great year. We had a successful year. The track was in the black for the first time. It was a huge moment, and per our deal, we're going to split the proceeds, right? And so ultimately, one thing leads to another, and once Carl recognizes that he's got, like, this is a successful racetrack, this thing can make money, this could be a business for someone. Initially, the thought was floated of having me buy the racetrack. Again, 22 years old now, staring down the barrel of being $1 million in debt in a cornfield in Iowa. It was very hard for me to make sense of it. No matter how passionate I was about it and how excited I was about everything that had happened and all the things that we had started and things that we had that we could build on, I also wasn't 100% sure. I don't know if this is true, but my dad always told me that if a business can't pay for itself on its earnings inside of 7 years, it's not worth touching. I'm sure those numbers it's different now, but back then I'm running the numbers and I'm going, we're going to have year after year after year of continued growth, ultimate success to make this thing pay for itself over the course of this period of time. And be able to live, right? Like, because I needed it to earn revenue to, like, pay for me and, like, other people, right? So anyways, I ultimately decided not to buy the racetrack, and it changed hands. When it changed hands, I was no longer involved, and I was kind of looking for what I had the option. There was an opportunity that I could have pursued about remaining involved with the racetrack. And I don't know, honestly, so many things contributed to this revelation, but I think The most significant one was the challenge that I experienced throughout the course of that 2005 race season with promoting my events. So still today, it's kind of tough to get ink locally. Like if you're not advertising a ton and your local newspaper is probably not going to pay you any mind. If they do, it's going to be like this much text, no photo, no salesmanship, no effort to help. So I was reaching out. We were having huge events. I mean, we were putting on a heads up drag racing series in 2005 that was light years ahead of what was happening elsewhere. Like it was an incredible thing that was happening. We had these huge holiday events. Every year we did a huge Memorial Day race. We did the aforementioned Night of Fire over the 4th of July. We had a huge Labor Day race. I mean, the track had we had some momentum and things were happening. We put on, I worked with Scott Galter to put on the first ever World Fuel Altered Nationals, which now almost 20 years later is like one of the biggest events that they have at Eddyville Raceway Park. I made that name up. Like that was my idea, you know? And so anyways, we were working on all these things, but I couldn't get an ounce, Jason, not an ounce of interest or media or ink or publicity. And back then, this is pre-social media. Right. The cutting edge of technology was message boards, right?
Ink so was it. You couldn't get it.
Yeah, exactly. And so I really struggled to get any of the racing media to pay us any mind. I think throughout the course of that great year that we had in 2005, one article that I'm aware of was published. And what's crazy is I had taken matters into myself, no sort of writer, but I just decided, man, I got to make sure these events are publicized. I need to make sure the news knows about this stuff. Like it's all the racers know, but that's like the classic preaching to the choir. How can I communicate with the masses or the people that don't know what's going on here? Media. So I started writing stories, like turnkey articles that I would send to media outlets. I mean, I sent them to everybody. I mean, including like National Dragster, the NHRA's House Organ, never published any of it. The IHRA, which we were an IHRA track and we couldn't get any ink in Drag Review magazine at the time. I tried and tried. Despite I hired a local photographer. I mean, we're really trying hard, writing stories, taking photos, and delivering this stuff free of charge to various media outlets. And we just couldn't. Nobody seemed to care. I think that one magazine, RPM magazine, did an article. I sent it to them. They wrote it or they published it. It was they used my guy's photography. It was cool. And then Drag Racing Online, Jeff Burke, a long since shuttered project. I actually complained to him about the fact that he never sent anybody to my races for dragracingonline.com. And he said, well, man, I'm broke. I can't, this is a small business. I can't send people all over the country going to races. And it's like, I surely know that situation all too well now. But he goes, if you send me something, I'll publish it. And so I started writing these articles and sending them to him. And I got a little bit of ink out of him. But what it really left me feeling is that there was a massive void in the drag racing community for independent, unbiased journalism. So the example that I like to use is, can you imagine stick and ball sports, MLB, NFL, NBA, etc., without Sports Illustrated? I mean, let's talk football for a minute, right? I mean, we got the Dallas Cowboys have their own magazine, right? The New York Giants have their own magazine. The Denver Broncos have their own magazine. The Kansas City Chiefs have their own magazine. Like, it would be, you can imagine how biased it would be, right? We only lost because they cheated. We're the best team in the world, Super Bowl bound, right? I mean, it was just, and that's what was coming from most of these drag racing media outlets, is they were singing their own praises, right? They were, very rarely did they take a tough or hard look at something. Very rarely did they analyze something or critically discuss something and not be afraid. I mean, no magazine, I mean, I'm not going to run an article criticizing anything we do. You know what I mean?
No, right. Well, and so actually, you probably would, though. You probably would. Well, you talk about the market, like both the concept and the concept behind Drag Illustrated and the market for it. Do you want to just talk a little bit about the business and also just a little bit, but about like the business of starting Drag Illustrated?
Yeah, man. So it's crazy how many things happen to you in life. Sometimes I start to tell these stories and I feel like I'm 115 years old. But
well, good. Stop, because that would make me 230.
I'll try. I'll do my best. But in the spring of 2006, we published Drag Illustrated for the very first issue, March of 2006, with Shannon, the Iceman Jenkins, a pro mod icon, his car on the cover. Huge moment for us at the time. I had two partners that I had went in on. Another little lesson was you don't have to know everything, right? I knew drag racing, but admittedly, I didn't know a single thing about the publishing industry. I had my sales experience amounted to, a couple of failed efforts with multi-level marketing pyramid schemes that I'd gotten wrapped up in. I tried my hand very briefly at selling insurance, but most of my sales experience was behind the desk, behind the counter at Buck Brothers Sunny Slope. So, and horse trading with my dad, going out, and that was one of the ways my dad made a living when we were young, is he would buy and sell race car parts. So he'd go buy an engine from so-and-so and clean it up or whatever, and maybe make a couple changes to it and flip it, make a little money on it. And that's how he largely afforded to go racing throughout my life. So that was kind of the sales experience that I had, but I still felt I needed to find some partners. I needed to find some people that were experts in the publishing field or experts in the sales field, and I could get in where I fit in, which was being the drag racing understanding and knowledge and interest and passion. So I met a couple of guys in in central Iowa, and we agreed over the course of 10 pots of coffees at a Denny's in Des Moines, Iowa, that we were going to launch Drag Illustrated. And there was three of us. We're going to all be third partners, right? 33 and a third % owners, a handshake deal that lasted nearly a decade. And I was going to be the drag racing, so I'd write all the stories, figure out all the pictures. I would handle the editorial content. I'd go to the races. I'd be the face of the business. And my two partners, respectively, would handle the graphic design and bookkeeping, and the other would handle all the sales, which I knew to be, the lifeblood of the deal in any business is selling, right? You got to sell something. So I knew that those would be very important roles. And honestly, all sorts of ups and downs and bumps and bruises that come with bootstrapping a business. This is no loan, no SBA grant, no daddy's money, nothing. Maxing out mom's credit card one time was kind of the way this whole thing got started ultimately. But anyways, kicked the doors open at Drag Illustrated in March of October of 2015. First issue came out in March of 2006. A little bit of the Eddyville Raceway Park landing was happening simultaneously as the Drag Illustrated launch or takeoff. So March of 2006, the first issue hits the street. We actually had worked tirelessly to get our hands on a massive mailing list that we had pieced together from various track databases, sanctions and series databases that we'd come up with little crazy deals to get them to give to us, which no one would ever do now. It's so funny. But back then, you make a couple phone calls and you can convince somebody to send you a spreadsheet. No big deal. They don't know how to open it anyways. So what do you want me to send you? I'm like, yeah, CSV file. No. Anyways, we got our hands on all these mailing addresses, and we proceeded to mail the magazine to people for free. For several years, because we knew the audience was the most important thing. Like, still to this day, very few publications make a lot of money, a large portion of their revenue stream from subscriptions. It's typically a small number. Even the biggest magazines in the world, even if the actual number is fairly significant, it's not the profit center, I guess you would say. So it's not the primary revenue stream. So anyways, our goal was to just, the example that I always made when people, or the thing that I would say when people question me, like, you guys just give this thing away? And I said, man, if we opened a bakery, I bet we'd give away some pies. I bet we'd give away some cookies. Like, we got to get people hooked on this. We got to get them to like the taste, like the flavor, like the presentation, like something about it. Right. And if I got to charge them first and I got to pay for them and they got to buy it sight unseen, I just think this will be easier. You're going to pay to market your business somehow. We just make our product and give it away. So anyways, yeah, man, over the course of 7 years, that partnership kind of peaked, and I was ready to take over the world. Anybody who knows me knows that I was more of an eager beaver then than I am now. I consider myself an aggressive business person at this point in time, but I was hyper aggressive at that point in time. And I kind of wanted to go to the moon, and they were comfortable with where we were. So ultimately I bought them out. took on another partner, more of a silent investor at the time. And spent another 7 years. I mean, 2 really, really long and fruitful relationships. But anyways, I ultimately bought out my partner and took sole ownership, 100% ownership of Drag Illustrated in December of 2019, which was right around Christmas, which is a huge moment. I was actually ringing bells in the Walmart parking lot with our producer of the show, JT Hudson, when that freezing our tails off, drinking spiked hot chocolate. When I made that deal finally, when the deal was done, that I owned the magazine free and clear, it was a done deal. Huge moment for me. Of course, 4 months later, the world is burning. COVID happens, and you had a front row
ringing a bell and coughing, and with some weird cough that I didn't know.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know if they let people ring bells anymore and all that stuff and be around folks. You can't touch the metal, the red thing, and put quarters in there. But anyways. Man, a lot's happened since then, obviously, but that kind of gets us fairly close to today.
Well, one question that I'm sure you get asked a bunch, and like the quick answer to running a magazine. I mean, the core business is a magazine business, so still running a magazine business in 2023. What's your answer to that question?
If we had $1 for every time somebody told us print is dead, we'd be on a beach having this very podcast, or I would be. I'm not sure where you might be, but
I'm on the beach. Yeah,
you're already on the beach. So
not because I'm rich, but I just live on the
yeah, you just live there. Yeah, just choose to live there. But man, early on, the initial Genesis story and those at 2000 in 2005, 2006, 2007, man, magazines were full steam ahead. I mean, obviously the internet was a thing and it was increasing in popularity, and there was more and more things were going digital or being put on the internet. But there was, at the time, I think when Drag Illustrated started, I want to say there was maybe 7 other drag racing magazines. So this was not a foreign concept. I mean, that's hardcore drag racing magazines, let alone an entire galaxy of automotive titles. I mean, a gazillion magazine titles, a gazillion race car and car titles and show car. Oh my goodness. Off-road magazines was a huge business that tons of publishers had their hands in, tons of people had their hands in. So initially to us, it was a no-brainer. I mean, it was a foregone conclusion that if you were going to communicate in mass like that, you'd need a publication. I mean, there weren't platforms like this. There weren't ways to do it. So we never really wavered. There were some at the time. There were 2, I believe 2. One had just started. One had been around for a minute. Drag Racing Online and Competition Plus had introduced this notion of an internet magazine. And not to fire shots or throw stones or anything like that, but if you've been in drag racing or if you've been in car culture in a participant fashion, if you've been hands-on, if you've been in our sport for any amount of time, you will know that this is a tremendously difficult endeavor. Drag racing, and I don't mean to talk anyone out of it, because it's infinitely rewarding. It's exciting. I can give you 1,000 reasons to go drag racing right now today, and 1,000 positive things. But you can't overlook or underestimate what it takes to do it. And I think that anybody who's been around this stuff for a while and has spent all night driving to a racetrack or worked all night in the shop and busted their knuckles and burnt their hands and fought with their wife or their dad or their mom or whomever, all in pursuit of this, going drag racing, right? You would agree with me that sometimes all you need is a little validation, right? A little bit of encouragement, a little bit of validation that people are noticing, someone cares about what I'm doing. And still to this day, I feel that drives the bus at Drag Illustrated, is that when you pick up a copy of Drag Illustrated magazine and you see yourself looking back at you on the cover, or if you see your name listed in there, even if it's a small photo, I can't begin to describe what that means to the racer, right? Like the guy doing it, the guy spending his money. Now, listen, you can make an argument that more this web article, right? More impressions, more views, more blah, blah, blah. Maybe so. Maybe it will be seen by tens of millions versus thousands, tens of thousands in print online. But it doesn't have the significance, that feeling. It doesn't produce that feeling. It's like a non-alcoholic beer. One's going to get you drunk, one tastes funny, right? And that's how I see like the digital content side. It's evolving. I don't mean to make light of it.
It's also for everyone in the photo too. I mean, I know at Gateway, when I used to run Gateway, it was like, oh, we couldn't wait for our for us to have a big race so we could take pictures of Tommy the water box guy and Ace and Chuck the starter.
There is no experience like seeing yourself in print, and I would argue still to this day that for the car guy, for the run-of-the-mill car guy, let alone a hardcore drag racer, there is no accomplishment like being on the cover of a car magazine. Right? We all grew up reading them. We all cut clippings out of them. We all saved the posters. We all looked at the part numbers. The magazines have been such an integral part of hot rodding for as long as it has existed that I think it's just ingrained in racers that, man, if you get in the magazine, you're doing something, right? Mm-hmm. And admittedly, times have changed. Information is consumed differently. Content's consumed differently. But still to this day, I would argue that, and here's a testament to that. Drag illustrated circulation stands today higher than it has ever been at any point in history, right? It's 2023. I've got an iPhone, an iPad, I'm a super tech-driven guy, but I would even tell you personally that I love to read our magazine. I love to read Rolling Stone. I love to read GQ. I love to read The Atlantic. Like, I love to read. And after I spend my entire day staring at screens and scrolling and clicking, I think some of the novelty of digital media has started to wear off. I mean, it's just, it's not as cool today as it once was to stare at your freaking phone. Matter of fact, some people have to limit themselves, limit their kids, because it's addicting and you get too caught up in it. And that's just not the case, in my opinion, with the written word, the printed word, and magazines being a huge part of that. So to be honest, we launched the magazine, giving it away about 3 years in, if I remember correctly. We had just put Alan Johnson, Top Fuel crew chief extraordinaire, won a multitude of championships with Tony Schumacher. We had just put him on. We strategically put him on the cover of the magazine to be the first issue that would go to paid subscribers. And that is when we switched to a paid subscription model, $20 over the course of time. As the magazine changed, we went from recycled newsprint with saddle stitching, full color from day one, something we were really proud of. But those early issues of DI, you needed to bathe after you read them. You ink all over your hands. It's disgusting. And then we transitioned to an improved, heavier weight newsprint, albeit still saddle stitched with a gloss cover. And then around the 50th, 47th issue, it was, I believe, 46, 47 issue of Drag Illustrated, we switched to what they call perfect binding, which is the glue strip in the middle with the bookend, and went to a full gloss format. This was the first time Drag Illustrated really looked like other magazines. Prior to then, it was a little rough around the edges, admittedly. But at that point is when we really embodied, in my personal opinion, like, we're a real magazine. We look like a magazine. We look like the other magazines on the newsstand or on desks. We were never on the newsstand, and we can talk about that if you want at some point. But anyways, the magazine basically remains in that form today, 140 issues later. We just sent our 182nd issue to print a couple of weeks ago. We're staring down the barrel of our 183rd. So yeah, and to kind of...
So just to take I know you're a drag racing guy, but to take a turn, we've gone from West Eddyville to West Drag Illustrated, and then in probably, I don't know, 17, 18, there was a turn back towards event promotion. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so admittedly, I maybe wasn't able to articulate this at the time, but now looking back, I can tell you, whenever I got my start in drag racing, putting on races, right? Running races. And I think that is something that I really fell in love with at Eddyville Raceway Park in Southeast Iowa. And it wasn't the act, it was what it produced. It was the juice that bringing people together gave me personally. I don't know if everybody feels this way, but I can close my eyes and be back on the starting line during some of the events that we threw at Eddyville Raceway Park. And it was it was the atmosphere that was produced. It was the intensity that was produced. But above all else, it was the people that it brought out, right? It was these relationships that were started. And I just have always, I mean, even looking back before race, I love throwing a party, love having everybody over, love throwing a party. And I think I knew what we wanted to accomplish with the magazine, but I think subconsciously or somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that where I ultimately wanted to be was I wanted the stories to be about races, the stories in Drag Illustrated about races I was putting on. And I knew that in my mind, but again, at the time, I really wasn't able to explain that. It was just kind of happening organically because I think subconsciously I recognized in order to do what I want to do in the sport of drag racing, put on big events, difference-making events people talk about, significant happenings in our sport, I knew that I would need a promotional platform. And I knew via recent past experience, that wasn't something that was going to happen via anyone else. No one was going to do that for me. I was going to need to do that myself. So throughout the process of building Drag Illustrated, we're building our own light. We're building our own spotlight. I no longer have to wait on other people to take interest in what we're doing. We kind of reversed engineered it, right? I want to put on races someday, but I want them to be a big deal. I can't get any of these existing people to talk about us or give us any love. So I'm going to build my own platform. And when the time is right, I will begin to put on my own events, not to compete with existing events that happen in the space, but to complement, right, the events that exist in our space. So the first opportunity to do that came in December of 2016. A few months prior to that, I had spent a weekend in Charlotte, North Carolina for, at the time, what was ADRL drag stock. And the ADRL had seen like 70 different iterations at this time, multiple leadership changes. And it was kind of, I don't mean to say this like disparagingly or whatever, but it was kind of on its last leg, or it wasn't what it used to be or what people kind of had fallen in love with. And here they were having this huge event at the Bellagio of drag strips, the Z-Max Dragway in Concord, North Carolina. And it was a ghost town. It was poorly attended. There was no buzz. And then they had, on top of all of that, I mean, what make matters worse, they had bad weather. So I found myself, that would have been in September of 2016. I found myself, whatever, it doesn't matter. I found myself in the hotel room alone, right? Back then I traveled bare bones. Ain't nobody going with me, not the girlfriend, nobody. I got to do this as cheap as possible. So I was sitting in the hotel room because it's pouring rain at the racetrack. And I am watching ESPN, no surprise. And I'm seeing the World Series of Poker. And I know nothing about cards. I'm no sort of gambler, never was, no sort of poker player, card player. But I'm watching this and I'm like, they hooked me immediately. I'm watching first few minutes and I immediately noticed that there's all these different characters at the table. There's the 10-gallon hat wearing cowboy, and there's like the mathematician and the kind of the trust fund baby, right, with the headphones and the hoodie and the sunglasses. And then there's like kind of a business forward, super chic girl, right? And she's playing that role. And I just immediately started to get enamored with these different personalities and who they were and what was happening and how they, went back and forth. And the stakes were high. They're losing all this money. They're making all this money. They're standing up. They're sitting down, all in. And I'm watching this. I'm like, my God, who in the world ever would have thought poker, watching people play cards with their money, not yours, right, could be at all interesting, let alone have me completely wrapped up in it. I mean, I forewent my dinner plans to like watch the rest of the poker tournament because again, this is watching it on my phone from Applebee's. If I wanted to watch it come to a conclusion, I had to watch it in my hotel room. So I'm watching this whole
It wasn't
thing.
even like a pandemic had us all sitting home watching it. It was like during old normal life where it still captivated us during old normal life.
It was it really, for what, and I still have my notes from that day. I'm a big note taker. I pretty much always have a pad and paper with me, some way to take notes. And I like to handwrite my notes. I even bought myself an iPad Pro last year and a stylus because I'm going to take all my notes digitally. And I still have it, but it doesn't do for me what writing on paper does. But anyways, I immediately start taking notes. World Series of I don't know, we need a World Series. There was already a World Series of drag racing, but it had kind of not jumped the shark, but it had been around for 50 years. And it was it was an exhibition deal. I wanted to do something about what I cared about, which was pro modified style drag racing. The people that watch this program and don't have a drag racing background may not be as familiar with it, but it's a certain style of drag racing. And I always say it's for the cars that still look like cars: Camaros, Mustangs, Corvettes, Vipers, blah, 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 blah. So my favorite style of drag racing, something I've been passionate about since the early 90s, I wanted to put on a pro mod race. And I had this notion of doing a World Series of pro mod, the Drag Illustrated World Series of pro mod. And just like the poker deal, it's got to be big money, right? It's got to be, we're going to pay $100,000. It's got to pay $100,000 to win minimum. And you know what? It's going to be invite only, right? It's going to be just the people that we want to be there, right? Not for everybody, highly exclusive, just like this card game I'm watching. You can't walk in there and play, right? You can't walk into the casino, jump over the ropes and play in the World Series of Poker. I mean, you got to work your way there. You got to earn it. And then it's going to be super high stakes, just like what I'm watching. It's going to be winner take all. No round money, no qualifying money. Everybody here comes to win. And if you're thinking about what it pays to qualify or what it pays to lose in the first round, you don't belong here, right? This isn't for you. There's places for you, but this isn't it. So I cook up this whole idea, and I ruminate on this I'm trying to think of how many years it was. Several, Jason. I mean, like several years of building on the notepad and adding notes and adding ideas. And I found myself like strategically sharing it with people, right? Like I remember one of the first people I told about it was one of my cohorts here at Drag Illustrated was Mike Carpenter. And I remember him immediately pitching it to his dad, who was an icon of pro modified drag racing, Charles Carpenter, the godfather of pro modified drag racing. Many people consider him. Mike pitched it to him. Winner take all. I was going to charge a $10,000 entry fee too, buy-in, right? So I had big ideas because I was broke. I didn't have $100,000. I had to figure out how to come up with it. So anyways, I pitched this idea to Mike, and he pitches it to his dad. And Mike calls me. He's like, man, my dad, like, he ain't paying any money to race, and he don't want to race winner take all. And I said, well, maybe this isn't for your dad. I don't know, man. I really like this concept. And so I would strategically share it with people, and sometimes I'd listen to their suggestions. Other times I wouldn't, but it was much like I sometimes do today. And you have to help me with is I'll need someone else to tell me it's a good idea or back me up. Right. Cause I just don't quite have the belief myself, which sounds crazy to anybody on the outside looking in. I sell it like I all believe it, but I believe it all, but I'm human too, and I get scared.
Sometimes that's part of the sales thing. It's like you got to say it enough, and then you believe it yourself.
Speak it into existence, kind of deal. So I vividly remember being a while later, being in Las Vegas, Nevada, at the second to last NHRA race, and I was there hanging out with some dear friends of mine, Cale and Cody Crisp of the legendary Crisp family, who are part of the Bandemere family, who own and operate Bandemere Speedway in Denver, Colorado, which is amongst the most celebrated drag strips on the planet Earth. There's a long list of accolades and things that can be said about a track that's successfully been in operation for 65 years. But I was telling my buddies Cale and Cody about this idea I had for a race, because I knew that they may be able to give me some valuable feedback because they work at a racetrack every day of the week in Bandemere Speedway. So I start pitching them on this, like, man, what if we did, what do you think about like a World Series of Pro Mod where we invite people from all these different sanctions, NHRA, PDR, well, at the time there wasn't a PDRA, ADRL, blah, 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 all the NMCA, all these IHRA, all these different sanctions and series, bring them to one place, one time, like do a big time grudge race, like a kind of almost like an underground street race, type of deal, but for big money on a big stage. And they're like, dude, you need to tell my Uncle Sporty about that. That sounds awesome. Right. And I said, really? And they're like, dude, I think he'd go for it. I really do. I think you need to talk to him about it. Well, we go out drinking, partying, whatever, having a big old time. And to be honest, it didn't get talked about again. I mean, we didn't discuss it again, the group. We went on our merry way. Cale was there shooting pictures. So we had other stuff going on. I was working for a race team at the time. So we all kind of went our separate ways. Fast forward a couple months to the PRI show in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I'm there in our booth. And talking to people, shaking hands, kissing babies, as I like to say. And here comes some dude in a Bandamere Speedway polo, right? I mean, very recognizable blue polo. Excuse me. Here he comes walking up. It's Sporty Bandamere, hands me his card and introduces himself and said, hey, I think we need to talk. And I'm thinking, to be honest, I had no idea what I'd maybe gotten myself into. I'd kind of largely forgot about the conversation with Cale and Cody and wasn't sure what was going to come out of his mouth. You know, I thought typically we had written something that pissed somebody off. Like for a little bit of context, most of the time what happened on that is, you know, I wasn't paying attention and we published some article that called somebody the wrong thing or said something we shouldn't have, whatever.
Got one of their sponsors wrong.
Yeah, oh my gosh. Or silly things like shift RPM, how you spell their wife's name, things that how are we going to know? Anyways, so Sporty says, hey man, I hear that you have like a pretty unique concept for a pro mod race. And I just wanted to leave you with my card and tell you that we'd be interested at Bandamere Speedway. Like and this was a real, incredible moment for me because Sporty said some things to me and I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially that they knew in their hearts that there needed to be new things happening in drag racing. And while they were, you know, massive supporters of the NHRA, probably one of the most celebrated national events that the NHRA put on, one of is in Denver at Bandamere Speedway. And this one of the longest running events that they have. I mean, I think they're celebrating their 35th running of this event this coming weekend. So anyways, as there's some timeliness to all this, he shares with me that he'd be interested in doing this. They strongly believe there need to be some new things, that it can't just all be NHRA. We can't put all of our eggs in that basket. Like no concerns about the future, nothing like that. Just saying that we know we have to diversify, just like pretty much any business owner should likely be considering. This is music to my ears, but I'm having a hard time, at least in the moment, believing this to be a reality or something that could actually happen, because I knew on the back end there was a lot of things with my plan that were going to be tough, like the crazy purse, the way I wanted to do some things. It was going to be interesting. Never been done like that before. So I wasn't sure how serious he was. And I didn't, you know, I wasn't playing hard to get or anything like that. But got to remember, at the time, I'm in the throes of a buyout, falling out with my partners at the time. And there are all these things. Life is happening. I had gotten married. I've got a kid now. Like there's a lot going on in my life. And at the time, you know, my parents dealing with all these things, right? So I admittedly just didn't make it that much of a priority because I was trying to keep my head above water as it was, let alone taking on something else. I believe it was in February, right after Valentine's Day. I'm almost certain is when some phone calls with Sporty and a few of the other members of the team at Bandamere Speedway culminated in the decision to do this. They're ready to do it. I mean, and I looking back, it's so funny. Like, who am I to have done some of the things that I did? But, you know, there was like a letter of intent. Contracts were drawn up. Like, it was a real thing that we're going to have the inaugural Drag Illustrated World Series of Pro Mod at Bandamere Speedway, August 5th, 6th, and 7th, 2017. This was going to be the event of the summer. 100,000 to win, winner take all Pro Mod shootout on Thunder Mountain. Oh my goodness. Like a huge thing. So we make the announcement. JT and I actually, our producer here today, actually, we made the announcement via our now longtime Facebook live show, our podcast, the Wes Buck show. It's so weird to say it out loud, but back then we just went live on Facebook and started talking to people. So anyways, we make the announcement, send out the press release. One thing leads to another. And it was a real full circle moment for me. I mean, I remember pulling up the drive of Bandamere Speedway the Monday of the race and going, okay, this is what it's always been about. I didn't know it because admittedly, I didn't know it. I didn't know it for sure. But in that moment, and actually Nate Van Wagenen, the editor-in-chief of Drag Illustrated, was sitting with me in the rental car. And I looked at him and I said, man, shit's about to get real. This is where things change. This is when we differentiate ourselves from everybody else that's in the game. right? This is when our hat gets thrown into the ring. Not only are we covering all these races, not only are we doing the best job covering all these races and telling the stories, we're going to start putting on our own races. And this was, it was a real moment for me, like a marker in my life that Monday, because we weren't putting on like a little shootout at the local racetrack. We were putting on a huge, internationally recognized, nationally followed drag race with the largest purse in the history of Door Slammer drag racing and the history of Pro Mod racing at one of the most iconic facilities in the world. I mean, pinch me, right? I mean, we're about to run Pro Mods on the mountain for big money. I mean, it was a huge moment for me. But in that moment, I realized this is home. This is where I want. This is what I want to be doing. I want to be in the action. I don't want to report on the sport from the outside looking in. I want to be a part of it. I want to be involved in it. And I want to be invested in a different way. We're very invested, right? At the time, we'd been in business for a decade, I believe, right around. We'd been doing it for a minute. So we were certainly invested, but I wanted to be like on the other side of the fence. And that moment kind of just grabbed me by the shoulders and reminded me, like, this is what you're put here to do. Like, you need, Drag Illustrated needs to exist, and it's a huge part of what we do, no doubt. But it was always kind of a vehicle for us to create things of our own and events of our own, and that has grown since then. But to fast forward briefly,
actually, well, I'll fast forward it in a question if you don't mind.
Yeah,
and I know we're going to end up leaving a whole bunch of stuff out, but we still have so much more to cover. Dang you for doing so much. We got so much to cover, but so then there were two events at Bandimere, one event in Orlando, and then recently one event in Bradenton. All four are big successes. Just from a business standpoint, biggest business lesson in 2 or 3 minutes.
Well, 5 actually. We did 3 events, 17, 18, and 19, all in Denver. That was our belief early on, was we needed to do at least 3 of these before we could kind of see where we were at. So in 2019, we had another successful event, but we were really struggling in terms of participation. For the uninitiated, running race cars, high performance vehicles at significant altitude is a real conundrum. It's less of a problem for your street strip, weekend warrior enthusiast, or people that race at that venue every weekend. But for all the touring pros that I was after, my audience, my market for the World Series of Pro Mod, these guys spent most of their year racing at sea level, right? So it was wholesale changes that were required to go race at altitude at this one race in the middle of the season, where they were chasing points and world championships and various other endeavors. So and this happens, right? As the news started to wear off the event, we were in our 3rd year, right? And it's not this unheard of thing. And it got to be seen or regularly understood, the level of competition that was going to be there, the people involved. It just became a tougher proposition to convince racers that it was worth their time to come, even though we were paying $100,000 to win, right? Still became a real challenge. Year 1, I believe we had 18 cars participate, 18 cars that we were invited. In year 2, we had 28 cars. We expanded the field. In year 3, we had 11, right? So we fell off like a cliff. I'm completely comfortable talking about it. And that was kind of the catalyst to go, okay, we need to pump the brakes here. We need to reset. Like, this concept works. And the idea, because the events were all successful from a sponsorship standpoint, ticket sales standpoint, merchandise sales standpoint, overall buzz and enthusiasm and energy. It was a win across the board, but we were just really struggling with participation. So the decision was ultimately made to kind of punt, take a break, figure out what we're going to do next. As my network grew, an opportunity presented itself to put on another race and change venues dramatically, do something completely different. And that was the World Door Slammer Nationals, a combo pro mod, pro stock race that we did in Orlando for 2 years in 2020 and 21. And that led to us, amidst COVID and all this craziness going on in the world, we're a small business, really couldn't justify the risk trying to put on a major event again, not knowing how things were going to shake out in the world. Are we going to all get shut down again? Is this whole thing going to go up in smoke? So we opted to take 2022 off, came back in 23. with the relaunch of the Drag Illustrated World Series of Pro Mod, but at Bradenton Motorsports Park. A tremendous success for us really across the board. I can talk about it at length, but as far as a couple of lessons, I mean, one is
just one lesson.
Yeah, I mean, I think one would be location, right? I mean, you learn about that in business, and it does matter. I do think there are instances where it can be defeated, it can be climbed over, but also oftentimes location matters, right? And context. I think the takeaway really is that context matters, right? And the context of the situation for me, the takeaway in Denver is I was asking racers to step out of the norm, race at in a challenging conditions in the middle of their season, 2,000 miles away from their home. And the context there was just tough. It was insurmountable in many ways. There wasn't enough that we could do, in my opinion, at the time to really keep pushing that narrative or trying to it was driving a square peg in a round hole. So I think one of the things that I learned was that context matters, right? Location matters. And then another thing is that we expanded the field. After we did it the first time, my phone is melting down. Calls from people that I hadn't talked to in years. Everybody, I want to come. I want to be a part of it. I'm sorry I didn't come. Or I'm sorry I didn't accept my invitation. Will you let me in next year? So I made kind of a rookie mistake and grew too fast. I think that that's something that we all have to remind ourselves of. How growth is great, but sustainable growth is really where it's at. I mean, it's fantastic if you can double your business, triple your business, blah, 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 blah. That's all fantastic. But what I like to see is a sustainable growth pattern, something that we can keep this going for a long period of time, or at least an extended period of time. And what I did is I fell prey to like my own bullshit. Like I had gotten wrapped up in the hype of the World Series of Pro Mod. People are beating my door down to come. And what do? Well, if 16 is good, 32 will be better. And even in that very second year, I expanded the field and I went from inviting 16 racers to inviting 32. Of the 32 invites, only 28 showed up. So there's a lesson. I'm going, man, these guys beating my door down, blowing my phone up to come, and then they no-show me,
and then they don't come.
Right? And I grew too fast. I should have left it exclusive. I would tell any business owner, I really think you're better to turn people away than expand, or accept more customers. There's a time, but you want to keep that demand high. Everybody wants what no one else has. It's a for marketing students, that's a fairly well-known thought process, but sometimes we forget it, right? With more, sell more, do more. But there is a time and place for that, I'm sure. But in this particular instance, what I should have done and what we are committed to now is keeping that air of exclusivity, keeping it something that's not readily available to anyone. And you'd be blown away about the impact that dynamic will have on your business, no matter what it is. So one of the big takeaways.
Gotcha. So let's take another turn too, because if people are just watching from the start and don't know you, we made the big case for magazine, and they may not know that you're also, Drag Illustrated has huge mixed media, huge integrated media, and that it's not just a magazine. Like there's a presence everywhere. You did talk about how some of that just started just as like Facebook Live, you and JT just like going off, but talk about if you can quickly talk about like the evolution and some of the business behind that.
100%. And thank you for recognizing that, because still to this day, I feel we largely are pigeonholed a little bit, or typecasted, if you will, as a print magazine, when I'm very proud of the multimedia platform that we have become. I go back to like the forum boom and the message board boom. We were there. We knew that it wasn't competition. It was a tool. It was something to use to serve our purposes. And we had to find ways when these new technologies came out. Don't be afraid of them. Find a way to put them to work. And we were fortunate in that a lot of our competitors in the drag racing space, I kind of jokingly say that when the internet kind of took fire, right, or caught on fire, and you got Facebook popping off and all these Craigslist and all these things are happening, a lot of people in our space in motorsports publishing, and especially in drag racing publishing and media in general, kind of put their head down and hoped it would go away. I mean, there were a couple of people that were like on the cusp and on the cutting edge and trying to do things, but a whole lot of people just kind of put their heads down and hoped silently hoped that the internet would go away, or that it was a fad, or that it would, kind of jump the shark like Fonzie.
We've seen this before. It'll go away.
It'll go away. This won't last long,
It's for them. It's for them.
It's for them, right? And I think that's probably the best way, is that still to this day, I think that there are a lot of common practices in media that have not been embraced by the motorsports media, or specifically the drag racing media, because that's for them. That's it. We don't have to do that, right? So what, on the contrary, our group, myself, the people that I surround myself with, the team, we always saw these new technologies as exciting things. I mean, I go back to that moment that I've referenced a couple times here with JT. Whenever we got the notification or the email, I can't remember exactly how it came about, that Facebook was going to allow you to broadcast live, we were giddy like school children. Like, we couldn't wait. Like, whoa, we're going to be able to like send a video out to everybody that follows us on Facebook. This is going to be bananas, right? And we couldn't have been more excited. And I have to believe there were some other people in our community, or in our space, that were like, oh, now we got to compete with that. Now we can't just keep writing stories or posting blog articles. We got to do that too. For us, again, I think we're the best storytellers in drag racing, and how dare we make people choose how those stories are consumed? And so I always kind of liken it to a quiver full of arrows. I think every arrow in our quiver, every time a new technology came out, Facebook, Twitter, all the social media stuff, YouTube. I remember we had a blog talk radio talk show that was done via phone lines, right, in like 2007 or 6, 2007, 8 for sure. Monday night, every Monday night, Wes and Wyatt in the evenings on Drag Illustrated Radio. We were everything that we could find to share our message and spread the gospel of drag racing and treat our guys and gals that exist in this sport like stars. We wanted to use it. We wanted to leverage it and put it to work for us. And that has really been the story since that first technology kind of started rolling out. It went from, we had a print magazine that was going out every month. Then we had a website. For years, that website was just a static homepage, right? But over the course of time, it became updated every so often. We would post stories there. We'd post pictures there every so often. We'd put the cover on the website so people could see the cover of the magazine. They couldn't read it, but they could see the cover. Then we dived into a daily updated content-driven website. This was probably one of the biggest investments we've ever made as a company. Way back when, we spent tens of thousands of dollars having a developer build us a website. It was a huge massive financial mistake, massive mistake across the board. But it did get the ball rolling towards, we've got to have a website. We got to communicate. We got to use this tool. The website turned into an email capture tool where we would get people to give us their email addresses. So we started to develop an email newsletter, an email database initially, just compiling the information. Then it became social media. Facebook, we were I hate to admit that we were a little late to the Facebook party. We missed a lot of the early growth that other brands enjoyed just because we were too busy trying to put out a magazine, right? We still had our priorities. We were comfortable and excited about this new technology, but we also knew what buttered our bread, So we had a sharp focus on Drag Illustrated magazine and didn't spend a ton of times, because we couldn't get spread any thinner than we already were. So we went from developing an email newsletter and database to active on social media. At this point in time, we've got 3 shows on Drag Illustrated's YouTube channel. We've got 650,000 followers on Facebook and Instagram. Those platforms, we have a full-time content director, a digital content director overseeing these digital properties. We have a full-time print team. We've grown, and we've just embraced all these different technologies because it's fun and it's exciting. It's new tech. There's new things. And lastly, I'll leave you with this particular subject. We don't got to wrap up anytime soon, I guess. But we have recognized that there is each one of those platforms, while there is certainly overlap, they're largely different audiences. The person who reads Drag Illustrated magazine and can't wait to go to their mailbox and pull that magazine out of the mail, it's polybagged and beautiful and pristine. that person is largely different from the person who goes to dragillustrated.com, has it bookmarked and checks it every day, or the people that subscribe to the Drag Illustrated Crew Chief Daily, our daily email newsletter. They're different from the people who watch this show or watch our weekly show on Wednesdays, the Wes Buck show. They're different from the people who follow us on Twitter. They're different from the people who follow us on Instagram. And what we found is while you can repurpose a lot of content and you can do a lot of things, you can cut once, measure twice, or kill multiple birds with one stone, you are tasked with creating content specifically for each one of those platforms. So anyways, that's kind of where it lies at this point in time. I've really struggled to adequately describe kind of like what we do, but we really are a multimedia company that tells stories and creates content and memorable experiences for people. But that's kind of where it lies here in the summer of 2023.
Nice. Well, here in the summer of 2023, we've built a big story now of everything that exists now. What's maybe just the 1 minute business takeaway or business lesson that you have of it all being together, like of it all integrated?
Keep going, I think, is something that I would tell anybody. And that's something that I had to remind myself during all the numerous dark days that existed. We have had and still enjoy plenty of great days. And to be honest, I've had way more good days than bad. But being in business for yourself, especially the course of the last few years, and especially there in the late 2000s, 08, 9, 10, it was a sketchy proposition. It was make a man out of you. It'll turn your hair gray like it did mine. And I think that keeping the faith, being patient in this hustle world, hustle and grind. Every rap song's about it. Every YouTube video's about it. And I'm a workaholic. I'm a absolute card carrying workaholic, no doubt. Working's my favorite thing to do, and it can be very problematic. But I do think that there have been times throughout all of this that I wish I would have like taken a breath. Or I wish I would have just not necessarily like quit or stop moving forward, but just take moments to take stock of where you're at, how far you've come, how much you have left to do. But yeah, man, I think patience, we talked about this earlier in the week on my podcast with Tony Schumacher, the winningest top fuel driver of all time. And we just talked about the patience that's required to be successful. I read a book recently and it says, if you get rich quick, you should probably be in jail. And, there's some truth to that, man. Right, I mean, it's not fun to hear, but it's going to take a minute. And I see people on social media specifically, they've been in business for 6 months and they haven't gotten a single call and they haven't had a single sale and they're ready to throw in the towel. And it's like, no, it's going to be like that. That's part of it. Like that's how it works. And I do think that people lack patience in this day and age. And, all sorts of things have contributed to that, but be patient.
Yeah. Well, got a segment here called Put Your Dukes Up. It's going to be 5 or 6 questions, and it's probably going to turn into like 9 questions, but you only get a minute to answer each.
My time in this or you? Or is JT going to have to step in? All right,
what's that? Yeah, I don't know. Are you ready to put your dukes up?
Yep, I'm ready to put my dukes up.
So we're going to talk about both combined and not don't cheat. You don't get a minute for each of these, but combining your industry and your businesses. We're going to talk. I'll ask you a question and just your combined answer for all of it, right? So first, we're going to do a SWOT analysis, right? So you'll have a minute for the strength, a minute for the weakness, a minute for the opportunity, a minute for the threat. So go, 1 minute. What's the strength of the industry and your business?
The strength of the industry and our business is, I think, passion. This is an industry that has worked its way through global pandemics, financial crisis, all sorts of different things. And this is a group of people that are going to find a way to go drag racing. And I think that resolve and that passion, that unique passion, is our community's superpower. We will do whatever it takes to go racing.
Weakness.
Our weakness is probably that aforementioned passion. I think it's a classic Garth Brooks. It's a double-edged sword. It's a blessing and a curse. I don't know if you've seen the Garth Brooks documentary, but he does that about 70 times. A blessing and a curse. And I think our passion sends us running into things 300 miles an hour, oftentimes having not fully thought things through, or perhaps overlooking the business implications or the financial implications. We get we want to do it bigger and better and badder, and we maybe lose sight of like, man, we got to make this last. We got to stick around for a while. So I think sometimes we have, for an industry that's been around 70 years of drag racing in an organized fashion, we still have some like youthful bliss, it would seem, and some youthful ignorance at times that I think is a weakness. And I think just a continued undervaluing of ourselves, not knowing what we're worth. That is something that I see permeate every racing series, every sanction, most events, most racers. They largely undervalue themselves. Opportunity is that drag racing is the great American motorsport. Much like fighting, everybody understands it. Everybody that has a driver's license and some that don't have been in a drag race. They may not have known they were in a drag race because the person in the car beside them at the stoplight didn't tell them, but they were in a drag race.
Sorry,
and I think
race your shopping cart.
You drag, absolutely. I mean, I see people, and to kind of double down on that belief, like if you talk about NASCAR, Formula One, I literally watched the Austrian Grand Prix last weekend, or 2 weekends ago, excuse me. And I remember hearing the announcers go, "Oh, it's a drag race to the checkered," or whatever. And I'm like, the best part of every other motorsport that's not drag racing is the drag race. If a drag race breaks out in any other type of motorsport, that's like the best possible scenario. 2 dirt bikes going through the whoop section of a motor course track, side by side, drag race to the other side. I mean, that's what our sport lives for. 2 wide coming out of the final toward the checkered flag, side by side, a drag race. This sport, I think the opportunity is just how much left there is for our sport. We're really early on, despite our history, a rich tradition that is drag racing. We've got a lot left to do. And car culture, by all accounts, despite, what we may think about our kids aren't as excited as we were about getting our license, I think the process is different. The timing of being fascinated with automobiles is a little different than it was when we were young. And I don't know that you're a car guy at 14, 15, 16, the way you maybe were when I was growing up, right? You kind of get introduced to cars in different ways. People don't work on their cars in their driveway the way our parents did. Times have changed, but motorsports, Formula One is booming. NASCAR is doing exciting things. NHRA, my locals, my community, sellout crowds constantly, better TV show, reality shows taking off. I mean, there are a dozen drag racing related, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but there's probably a half dozen drag racing related reality shows that are booming on Discovery Channel and various other platforms. I think the opportunity is huge. There's just fertile soil that we're walking around on. People are interested in this. On the heels of COVID, people want to go do things. People were reminded what it's like to have that option taken away, and live events are really enjoying that right now. The result of that. And then what's T?
Threat.
Oh, threat.
Timekeeper.
Timekeeper. Threat is definitely, and I'm not that guy, right? So bear with me. But I think the biggest threat, there's a couple. Urban sprawl is definitely something that drag racing is contending with. I mean, these cities are getting, tracks that were 20 miles outside of town are in a neighborhood now, right? Tracks that have been around, a lot of the drag strips, iconic facilities in our sport have been in place since the late 60s, early 70s. And so where they were well outside of the local city limits at one point, now they're on the edge, right? And that is a considerable threat to us that I think we have to at least be aware of. And I think efforts need to be made by track operators to find ways to, whether you're putting a school on the property or a training center or doing whatever is required to keep yourself indispensable or make sure they can't run you off. We got to be doing that. Secondly, is I think the government, I admittedly am not as much of a student of these politic type situations as maybe I should be, know enough to be dangerous. But one of the things that SEMA, an initiative that SEMA, the Specialty Equipment Manufacturers Association, one of our sport, the car community's kind of like governing bodies, if you will. One of their big initiatives right now is the RPM Act, which basically keeps EPA, keeps the government out of our garages, allows us the opportunity to modify our cars. There was a movement by the government to basically ban the modification of vehicles, all these different ordinances that would really crush car culture and the automotive aftermarket. So knowing about these things is probably the first step, but that's one of the biggest threats that exist. Is
it's also complicated because it's not just we say the government and we just think there's just one thing. It's actually it's the federal government. Then you got 50 states all doing different things. Still same rule. 1 minute answer. Most overrated part about being Wes Buck?
Oh man, that's a really tough one. Most overrated part about probably you're so lucky you get to do what you love. I had a mentor early in my life tell me that you shouldn't do what you love for a living. You should do what you love second best, what you do for a living. And it was kind of interesting, but I chose the latter. I can't wait to be on the starting line of a racetrack or in the pits of a racetrack, a drag strip. I love the people. I love everything about our sport. And I love it so much that having made it my career, having made it my business has been precarious, right? I mean, it's like, I think that's the most overrated thing is like, oh, you get to work in drag. I do. And it kind of at different times has soured things. It's made me jaded. And I've had to check myself at multiple, junctures, go, Wes, you love this. Shut up. Go do this, whatever. But that's one of the biggest challenges is whenever you do, when you turn your passion, your hobby into your career, no matter how small of a percentage, somewhere it's work. And you're blessed if you're able to have it feel like it's not work most of the time. But I would tell you that you're a liar if there's not days when it feels like work. And yeah, that's probably the most overrated part.
Most underrated.
Most underrated part of there's a
wait, JT, have you ever seen this? Have you ever seen Wes Not? Wow, we got him.
The most underrated part. The most underrated part, and I think it's something that just people's space or whatever, is just working with a team. I think there's a lot of people, especially post-COVID or whatnot, that are like super chill and happy and content in their cubicle alone or at the desk in their basement alone. And we're kind of in this age of solo entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, right? People that are doing their side gig or their business on their own, and they work from home and they work remotely. And I think the most underrated part of being Wes Buck is the opportunity that I get to work with like-minded people that are badasses, that are fired up. Like, I love my team. I can be having the worst day, having everything go wrong. And as silly as this sounds, I wish other people had got to experience what I get to experience. I jump on a conference call, a sales call, an edit team call, whatever. And it almost always makes my day better because of I love working with people. That is something that a lot of people hate. You talk to a cash register or a cashier, you talk to a bank teller or whatever, they hate working with people. Oh my God, I hate the public. I love working with people, and I've been blessed to get to work with some of the best people in the world that share my vision. And even if they don't maybe see it as clearly as I do, they support me. They share my passion and enthusiasm, and they believe in me, and I believe in them. And there's some real magic that I think everybody should be so lucky as to get to be a part of a badass team once in your life. Like, whether it's in stick and ball sports or whether it's in like business or whatever, there is nothing quite like being part of a real team, like a meaningful team where everybody has everybody's back. It's hugs and high fives when you see one another. It's love you when you hang up. It's going to weddings and meeting kids. Like, there's really nothing to me. I mean, I've gotten to travel the world. I've gotten to go to a bunch of cool things, do a bunch of cool shit. I enjoy a lot of flexibility and freedom. But yeah, man, working with a team, most underrated part.
Biggest mental hurdle.
Who am I who am I to say all this stuff that I just said? Who am I to have an opinion on what NHRA should do? Who am I to tell some track promoter what he should do? I've had and still struggle with to this day imposter syndrome, like since I knew what it was and way before. I quite frequently struggle with that. Who am I to put on this big promo? Who am I to tell people that I'm going to put on the biggest, richest pro mod drag race in the history of the known universe, right? Who am I to tell people that every other race is testing for mine, right? I mean, and I think it's just some of the self-belief. I grew up pretty rough and tumble. I mean, my parents, God bless them, are awesome or whatever, but my dad was pretty hard on us. And it really sent me out into the world not knowing if I knew what I was doing, not having the confidence that I wish I would have had. I had some cocksuredness that I'd just kind of come by naturally, right? And I had some belief and I had some big ideas, but I could really quickly pour cold water on that just by being alone with my thoughts for 30 seconds. And I think that that's probably been the biggest mental hurdle, is just having the self-confidence, seeing it through has been one of them. And also probably accepting that there's no finish line. It's like the ultimate cliche, life's a journey, blah, 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 blah. But as someone who like grew up having to beat the game, like if I played any video game, this is one of my go-to examples, I have to play it till I beat it, and then I never play it again. I mean, quite literally, I've played all these video games in my life, and the moment I beat the game, achieved 100% completion or whatever, I never played it again, ever, because the challenge was over. I set out to beat this game, and I beat it, and it's been really difficult for me to accept that ain't gonna happen in life or business, that the game is indefinite, and trying to find some sort of contentment or settle into the fact that there's never going to be enough magazines, enough subscribers, enough tickets sold. There's never going to be, it never ends. It's an ongoing thing. It's an ongoing experience. And that's probably been one of the hardest things for me. Nice. I keep waiting to beat the game.
Right? There's no game to beat. Well, then you beat it, and there's going to be 2 new social media platforms every year. So
right,
there'll be 2. So last messages for 3 different groups. Again, still 1 minute each. What's your last message for or not last message, but just parting word for the guys older than us, guys and girls older than us that laid the groundwork for us?
Oh, my message for them is we're standing on the shoulders of giants. I mean, I just think about everything that we've done, and as proud as I am of so many of the things that we've built here, created ourselves, and had a hand in, it's not lost on me all the people that came before us, the millions and billions probably in drag racing that have been spent pursuing this sport, growing this sport. I think I say thanks. A lot of the success and a lot of what exists in drag racing today exists because of the philanthropic efforts of well-to-do drag racers, people that have had success in their business, had success in their life, and have committed some of that success back to the sport of drag racing. And I think about all these businesses, the Forrest Lucases that own Lucas Oil, how much money has he injected back into the sport, chasing hopefully, right, a return, but knowing that it doesn't really matter if it is a good investment or not, because it's in support of the sport of drag racing. Jeg Coughlin Sr., I mean, all these people that have invested tirelessly. I mean, I'm naming 2. There's hundreds and thousands of people that have spent and sponsored and helped the local track or helped the local racer or helped a racer that was in a category before them. I just hope that all those folks know how much we appreciate them and how much I appreciate them. I mean, it's John Bandemir, right? John Bandemir Jr. that agreed to allow the World Series of Pro Mod to happen in Bandemir in 2017, that first time. I mean, these guys have taken chances. They've put their money where their mouth is. They've cast their vote with their wallets. And that investment is just not lost on me. So a huge thank you to all of them, and let them know that we're just getting started. Like, God bless all the ground, all all that you've done in the trails you've blazed. But I truly feel our sport's just getting started.
Gotcha. How about to the new generation, the younger generation?
patience, stick at it. Thank you. We're paying attention. I think if I had to tell young racers anything, I would want them to know that we notice you. Whether you're in a junior dragster, you're racing the high school drags, you're a sportsman racer, a local weekend warrior bracket racer, I want you to know that we appreciate you and you're the future. You're the difference makers. I mean, it's not John Force that keeps Goodyear in business, right? It's not pro level racers that keep most of these repair, hot rod shops and chassis shops and part manufacturers in business. It's the do-it-yourselfers, the weekend warriors that are spending their hard-earned money, time they don't have, money they don't have, chasing the drag racing dream. And I want people to know that we're paying attention. We appreciate you. You mean as much to us as John Force or Tony Schumacher or anybody else or Jason Scruggs or any of my other heroes. Shannon Jenkins. Sportsman racing, grassroots racing is the backbone and the lifeblood of our sport. And I always compare like what we do at Drag Illustrated a little bit to comic books, right? Batman and Superman, superheroes, right? The larger than life folks that we as kids aspired to be. We treat Drag Illustrated in some instances much the same. We're trying to tell the stories of the top performers and the guys that are making a difference to inspire others to do the same, right? And so I do want people to know that's why Drag Illustrated, the 30 under 30 exists. I mean, we've got programs that we've built specifically to highlight drag racing's next generation. So I want them all to know that we care about them.
Also, how about for the next generation of business owners, not just in drag racing, but motorsports?
Oh, the next generation of business owners. Well, you know what? I don't want to ever be negative, but it's harder than it looks, right? And be ready for that. Right. I mean, and that's okay. A lot of things are harder than it looks. But that doesn't mean you just give up. You throw in the towel the first time things go south, the first time someone hangs up on you, whatever happens. It's not as easy as it looks. So have patience, right? Keep your head down, be focused. There's another time to be laser focused. And I think that I read this the other day or saw a video about it. It really spoke to me. And it said that there was a study, an attempt was made to study the personality traits of the most successful people in the world. And most of them have three things in common. They're big dreamers. They have a big idea, delusions of grandeur, right? There's bigger things out there. There's bigger things for me. They're big thinkers. Secondly, they are super hard on themselves. They have like a crippling insecurity that they're not doing enough. Right? Which is very interesting because I know that I suffer with that. I can work all night, wake up in the morning and feel like I'm lazy and worthless. But thirdly, and this is the difference maker, because a lot of people have big ideas and a lot of people are workaholics and feel like they can never do enough. But the third trait is people that are able to be laser focused, put all their emphasis and every ounce of energy they have on the goal, the mission, the belief or whatever, and completely ignore everything else. And I know tons of people in my life, and I have been a victim of this early in my business career where I wanted to chase every opportunity and chase everything and every new shiny object. I was like a squirrel chasing a nut, right? But it was only when I decided to stop chasing other people's dreams and other people's visions and focus on what I wanted to do and what I was trying to accomplish and what my project needed, what I was trying to bring to the world. That's when the magic happened. That's when things started to move in the right direction rapidly. So yeah, man, stay the course, stay excited, and stay focused.
Nice. Final question. Last message to your peers, business peers.
Let's do better. Let's do more. And we can do a lot more together than we can apart. I mean, I can do this one quickly. This is a really, really incredible community, but we struggle at times to work together. We're so competitive. We're so innovative. We also think we can do it better. We can do it faster, whatever the case. We can do it stronger, make it last longer. The magic will happen whenever we all really start to swim in the same direction. And I think there's a whole lot of people, and I'm specifically speaking to drag racing, the drag racing community. We're largely segmented, the bracket racers versus the big money bracket racers, the no time racers versus the class racers, big tire races versus the small tire racers, prep racers versus the no prep racers. And the list goes on and on. Top fuel versus funny car, naturally aspirated versus power adder. Oh my goodness. There's so many individual segments and communities that exist in drag racing. And I promise all of you that if we can all start swimming the same direction and recognize that what's good for pro mod racing is probably good for pro stock racing. And most of this stuff, if we can work together to serve a common goal, which is growing and building the sport of drag racing, this group of people can do whatever we want. We literally, I said this during our racers meeting at the World Series of Pro Mod. We had 61 Pro Mod racers on the property of Bradenton Motorsports Park for the World Series of Pro Mod's return. And I looked at that group and I'm thinking, okay, there's millionaires here. There are engineers here. There are doctors here. There are lawyers here. There are real estate tycoons here. There are like this group of people. And we can do whatever we want. I mean, if we needed to build a spaceship, I'm fairly certain this community of people could get it done. And that, I don't think you can say that about every group of people, every community, right? I go to a lot of events. I go to, all sorts of networking events and whatnot. And I don't see, and this is not to be mean or anything like that, but I don't see the really crazy, incredible group of people that I see in motorsports and that I see specifically in drag racing. So if I had a message to my peers, it's like, all right, guys, let's work together. There's enough to go around, right? This is a booming industry. Automotive aftermarket's doing well. There's enough to go around. Competition's good, no doubt about it. But let's try and grow and build this sport together.
Awesome. Well, that's it for the questions, and that's it for you as the first guest.
Holy moly, man!
What's that?
Holy moly, man! I don't think I've
moly.
ever been interviewed that thoroughly ever.
I love the way it feels. Well, I mean, you have a great story to tell. I guess I also have to just acknowledge you, right? Like I've known you probably. If you feel 115, then I feel 230 because I was with you for a part of it. Actually, well, for most of it, really. I mean, probably starting at Eddyville. But yeah, you're a huge inspiration to. I can't say to us all because, as JT said before, we don't know who all is going to watch it, but at least the drag racing portion of it and the people that know you, you're a huge inspiration to us. You create a whole bunch of things that excite us. The thing that I'm probably the most proud of, which we didn't talk about too much, is Wes the family man, Wes the father, Wes the guy that does these big things and takes his family on vacation. So that's also a huge part of it. Yeah, we love all the things you do, and thank you for being the first guest. And I hope that a bunch of people watch this episode and get a bunch of value from this episode and from you.
Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it a bunch, buddy. I can't wait to see what happens next.
Of course, yeah, can't wait to see what happens next. Another big thank you to the producer of the show, JT Murder Tundra Hudson. Don't know if I was supposed to give the last name out, but whatever. I know he's on the no-fly list or whatever he's on.
Every one of them. Government watch list. Yeah.
He's on all the lists. But thank you very much for watching the first episode. We're going to have a bunch more coming at you. And again, the purpose here is for us all to build great businesses and motorsports, to continue to build motorsports. So love y'all. Let's do this, and see you next time on Drag Illustrated, the racing business.
Thanks, buddy.